Well, welcome back to part two of Introduction to Native Plants with special guest Gavin Schaefer. Um, Last session, Gavin kind of took us through the broader scope of native plants, took us through the ecoregions, and specifically a deep dive into the Great Plains and more like just native plants, prairie grasses, etc., kind of talking about an overview of that. This session, Gavin is going to be taking us through what do you want to do in your own, what can you do in your own area to be a part of this, whether that's how to plant them, what this looks like practically, things you can get involved with, just more knowledge on where to go from here. Now that you know what a native plant is, how can you start using the land you have to help support them? So, Gavin, I will let you take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. I will start sharing my screen to show you the madness I have compiled together. Um, and thank you, Emily, for the introduction. Thank you, Morin Academy, for having me. Does everything look like it's my screen?
Not yet. It says
Yeah.
double click to enter full screen mode.
It says you are screen sharing. Entire screen share. How about that? Does that look like anything?
I see your screen, yeah. So if you go to the presentation tab, I bet
Cool. Cool,
you're
cool, cool.
good.
Here we are.
Yeah, you're good.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, this is an introduction to native plants. This is the second session, as you have been made aware, and this is going to be a little bit under an hour of pure content with some of the remaining questions and answers. But at most, it'll just be an hour and a half. In that first session, it was just a primer on ecology, where I spent all that time asking what is the ecology and natural history of where I live. Gavin Schaefer, in Kansas City. We learned that it's a really dynamic landscape that's has natural history and phenomenon spanning hundreds of millions of years over hundreds of thousands of square miles. That has given rise to four ecoregions that we can recognize based as the confluence between all of those factors and all of that history. One being in Osage Cuesta, these undulating hills with a very steep eastern side with a gently sloping western face with prairie and wooded affinities. The wooded Osage Plains, which has lots of really cool glades and barrens with cacti and scorpions and prairies and forests and just a very, very cool but topographically pretty flat sedimentary rock base. Then you have the Missouri alluvial plain, which has been informed almost entirely by the historical meandering of the Missouri River, depositing all of these alluvial or water deposited sediments. They have given rise to these wonderful wetland and riverine systems. And then, of course, the all but lost rolling lush prairie that once existed, especially north of Kansas City and in the surrounding river valleys of this wind deposited, glaciated soils. This is a photo of Star School Prairie, which is an MDC prairie about 2 hours north of Kansas City. And so these four community types is really what the specificity that we got down into. But really today in this nitty gritty, we're going to be discussing conditions that are much smaller than this. And just to give you an appreciation of this, as to how nitty gritty we really can get, this is a historical vegetation map of Jackson County, Missouri, which was compiled from a Missouri statewide data set that was published in 2021. This is from speculator records from the 1800s of just land surveys. And from these notes, we're able to compile what the likely vegetation was back prior to industrial development. And so you can kind of see the different colors, green being a forest, gray being a barren or scrub, those glade systems. That's really, really prevalent down in the south eastern side of the county. And then, of course, like these intermediary systems between prairie, the salmony, sherbety orange color to all the way to like blue, green, and dark green. And so these you can kind of see that despite the fact that you have like these large, broad strokes of ecoregions, even at the most specific level that the EPA gets, you still can get into these finer scales of of classification. And so from this, we can really appreciate the mosaic that was the natural landscape prior to European colonization and industrial development. And so we ended off with the fact that so much has been changed, so much has been overturned, and we want to put together what remains by planting native. And it's for the ecology, like I said, weaving the land back together by getting at least some workhorse species in the ground and helping create habitat instead of just losing it. And it is also beneficial for society. People living in an ecologically intact area is a beneficial thing. It is a place where happier, healthy people can live, and also culturally abandoning the effects on people of industrialization and in the times that we're living in where technology is often outpacing our cultural development. And so I think being able to weave the landscape back together, this healing of habitat, is also culturally healing for us. And so these very amorphous abstract concepts, these ideas, help introduce us to something that is a little bit more nitty gritty and practical and specific, which are scalable steps. I apologize for the corporate language, but this is a framework that we can use no matter the circumstance or scale as to which we're working at when we are quote unquote planting native. So I hope to cover a pretty broad stroke as to what circumstances people may be within, but you have to determine what species are there. And that is like the whole point of the first session, which is determining what is native to your region, how you can find out, and what that greater context is. And then you can go on to the more practical matters of sourcing plant materials from local vendors, prepping your site for planting, actually planting, establishment maintenance. Those natives are those native plants are pretty famously not super showy within that first year. So, and there's some major legwork to be done. And then that long-term maintenance, what needs to be done long in the future, given the fact that this is an anthropogenic or person-created thing, and what is the involvement required of you further into the future. So you're going to be asked a lot about like, who am I looking at? What organism am I looking at? What plant is that? What bug is that? What bird is that? And I implore you, don't go to Google, don't go to Gemini, don't go to paid services. Ask iNaturalist. It is a nonprofit organization that has created an app for people to use that gives a relatively accurate idea of an organism based on its photo for free. And that observation is geotagged and given a time, and that gets uploaded into a huge database. It is open science. So these 285 million observations on every single continent worldwide, documenting 452,000 species from 3.9 million observers, again, worldwide, has led to the publication of over 5,000 peer-reviewed papers. And so if you actually go on the laptop based application, if you actually go on the website on a computer, you can really explore what people are doing on there. And not only is your ID identified by an algorithm that analyzes the photo based on machine learning, but you also have taxonomic experts and amateur enthusiasts going into your observation and helping it get to a further and further and more accurate identification. So there are people and technology helping identify what you're looking at. So I encourage you to use iNaturalist. It's how I spend a lot of my time perusing the internet. Now, getting to the first step, selecting species. It is often a question of scale and aesthetic. Like, I don't want a species that's too tall. It's going to flop over in my garden. That's fair. If I have a species that is thorny, I'm going to be working in a garden with my hands. You may not want to choose that one. The garden scale is by garden principles, which are often aesthetic choices. It's once you go beyond the gardening scale that you really get into restoration principles when you're talking about converting fields. And really the thing to take note, regardless, is that a part of this cultural change, part of this cultural shift, is kind of healing ourselves of the disease of English gardening, of Victorian style gardening, where everything's in neat geometric lines, turning our boxwoods into bunnies and such things like that. That is not how plants occur in nature. And these plants are from the wild. They're not cultivated. And so they're going to be differentiating themselves like they are in this photo, where you see the white penstemon hugging that shaded corner, the Tradescantia being that purpley blue, kind of being the intermediary, and then that Coreopsis being all the way in the sun in the driest conditions, hugging that bottom right corner. So that's how they differentiate themselves in real time and real space, by sowing themselves into places where they do actually flourish, and partitioning their space. That is the sort of geometric satisfaction you might actually get in this. It's not going to be in the visage of the queen. So what plants should I plant in species selection? Hence the title. This is again predicated on what we talked a lot about before. Obviously, they should be native, but when you're talking about what you should plant, it's still horticulturally consistent from cultivated species. Sun exposure dictates a lot, because it dictates what community types these plants come from. So a full sun system, a prairie grassland system, versus a full shade forested system, that they have high fidelity. They really like to stick to those conditions. When you do have some generalists that can kind of ride that line on that forested edge, like wingstem or Virginia wild rye, or some of these other species that can occur in some of these variable conditions, but you really should look at where you're at and read the landscape with sun exposure. Moisture is just as paramount. There are wet species and there are dry species, and then there are mesic species, or species that kind of fall in that middle, and that dictates a lot about what you should plant. Looking at your soil conditions and kind of thinking about these sorts of things like moisture. Aspect informs both of these things. If it's north facing, it's going to be wetter and it's going to have less sun. If it's south facing, it's going to be much drier and have much more sun. And then that eastern sun in the morning is much gentler than that western sun, which is often a little bit hotter and drier. So these are the sorts of changes that you should be. These are the sorts of things that you should be thinking about for aspect. Elevation here in Kansas City is actually kind of the opposite of what you might have farther west in some of the more mountainous areas, or far east in like the Blue Ridge Mountains. Elevation actually means hotter, and increased elevation means hotter and drier. You're getting more wind exposure. You're not going so far up in altitude that you're going to get in some of these colder and wetter conditions. It's actually at these lower elevations that you'll have more accrual of moisture and cooler conditions. And then, of the most paramount importance, current species. What species are already occurring there? Hence, using things like iNaturalist, if you're not familiar with them, to build your knowledge. Current species tell you all of these things because they already are there. They're already present. And if you're living within rural conditions, there's going to be more species telling you what's going on. It's really just in these really fragmented urban suburban environments that you have less to go on. And frankly, they are all consistently, no matter what historical vegetation occurred there, what sort of ecosystems were there, they're almost all full sun, dry, and with very little soil. And so it kind of is philosophically challenging, because despite the fact that, it might have been a white oak stand with very cool, moist conditions, and that it's now all just concrete and heavy metal with very little shade. And so we're kind of faced with a philosophically challenging question of what do we plant? And really, when you look at native plant horticulture within the Midwest, it's almost all prairie plants. And we do live in the Great Plains in a grassland system, but say, for example, half the vascular flora within Missouri are wetland species. And so it's in conjunction with these wet prairie systems and these wet forested systems. And so you have all of these other sorts of community types. And so I encourage you to really experiment with some of these microclimates that you might find at a shaded corner or on a north-facing edge or things like that, to kind of venture out of just planting prairie plants. But that's why often you find prairie plants within native plant horticulture. It's just they fit the conditions that are often already there just so well. And when you're talking about selecting prairie plants, I encourage you, visit prairies, find prairies where you are, and ask a vendor if you find something that you like growing out there, if it's suitable for your conditions or if it's commercially available. And so it's these sorts of things that you can really become less transactionary about and more participatory about. So planting native also insinuates that there is no longer species there. And just as I said before, with rural communities, they often still have some extant, some still existing communities. And so if you already have property that is forested, that has relatively little non-native vegetation, I encourage you to just, instead of trying to push a narrative on vegetation that you already have that is already facilitating itself, and you also have, say, like a lawn, just try to spread it into the lawn, collect seed from your property, and slowly incorporate it into your landscaping. So I really implore you to explore this place that you live. Now, if, say, you don't have a whole prairie or a whole intact forest on your property, that's fine. You're most people. You have to source plant material, and I encourage you to go with seed rather than transplants. But if you are going with seed, it's cheaper. It needs to be sown in the fall, so it needs to be scarified by those cold conditions as likely a perennial plant, and it must remain in or on the ground for the whole winter. So that's a bit of a con. It can be a little difficult with that. But the transplants, I encourage you not to do those simply because it's just, again, it's just less participatory. You don't really get to see the whole process. But I understand it is easier for beginners. So if you are starting from absolutely nothing to native plant gardening, this actually may be the right choice for you. You just will have to start small, which is fine. It just will be a little pricier per unit. And they're ready for the garden in spring. Some people plant them all the way up into June, July. Just be careful about the heat and shocking those plants by transplanting them with the heat and dryness that may accompany that. Now, this is an info dump for the place that I live. If you don't live where I live, that's fine. Try to find analogous institutions and organizations and businesses like this. But the folks on the left are great for hooking people up with resources. Deep Roots Kansas City is a wonderful nonprofit organization within Kansas City. They have annual spring sales. They actually can provide plants to you, but they also have compiled a sales list for the KC Metro every spring. They also have really, really good gardening websites, resources on their website, and they have webinars out the wazoo. I was in one about native plant gardening. There's a Need to Be Gorman, which is a office out of the heart of Kansas City. It is a discovery center, so there's lots of like fun displays and programs that they put on there. They have a little Acorns program for children. It's adorable, and they do educational events, and they have a free first come first serve in-person plant giveaway. So there's things like that, and they also have staff that can help you hook you up with consultations and advisors. The Missouri Prairie Foundation is a fantastic conservation organization. They're also a nonprofit. They actually buy up original prairie within Missouri and some of the surrounding areas, perhaps in the future. And they have a ton of webinars, annual sales, and they actually have a garden grant that they give away every single year. And then the nurseries. So you have City Roots, Missouri Wildflowers, and So Wild Natives. These are plug raisers and seed providers at a smaller, more suburban, local scale. Taylor Creek and Star Seed, you're talking like minimum purchase of $500 for seed. We're in the big leagues now. This is wholesale, really, really good quality stuff. They work on industrial projects with NRCS, on agricultural projects to mitigate damages and to create pollinator plots. They do really, really good stuff. Prairie Moon is really cool to explore your options. They don't have a lot of close ecotypes to Kansas City versus the rest of these all have Kansas and Missouri wild ecotypes. They're based in Minnesota. So they have Minnesota-based ecotypes. And so if you're in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, it's a fantastic option for you. Even if you're in the surrounding Great Lakes region, if you're planting prairie, they're a fantastic option. But they just are really well developed, and they have a fantastic website. And so I would encourage you to explore it. And if you're doing a little garden area, it's fine. You just buy a little seed pack from them. They're cool too. So prepping the site. Now we're getting into, the rubber's really hitting the road. Like, we know what species we're planting. We know what mixes we're doing. We talk to the vendors. The species work out for where we want to go, that we have the seeding rate from the packet or from the vendor directly. We're now prepping the site. We're doing it. We need bare ground for seed. We need dead lawn or mulch garden beds for plugs. So however you get there is however you get there. it really is a dependent scenario on your circumstances and your resources. And so the question is about whether doing it mechanically or chemically. That is a question based on scale. If you're going at a garden scale, there is absolutely no reason you should be using chemical. There's just very, very little reason, unless there is a persistent calorie pear, Bradford pear in your yard, or tree of heaven that's self-seeding in your yard. There's really no reason to use chemical. You can do everything mechanically. And you can really start to see that at a killing your lawn scale, which is kind of the most popular scale right now. So killing your lawn, you need to kind of like layer your methods on that. The most popular tool, and the tool I recommend, is the sharpshooter spade, which is that spade not at the top, the fun aesthetic one that I put in for my slides. It's the one on the far right, that really, really long guy. You want to go in at an angle that doesn't kill your back, but really gets underneath that sod. And you want to kind of go in like a little bit of a manageable square, and you can just flip that bad boy over so that the underside showing and just bare dirt, and that grass is buried underneath. Some cultivars and some species, that is all you need to kill them. They're like barely holding on already. They're stressed out. They're mowed down. They're fertilized. They're just absolutely miserable, waiting to be put out of their misery. That is great. Great news for you. Most of the time, it isn't that simple. You probably will need to do other things, like solarization. Solarization is taking a clear tarp. I recommend you put a little bit of water down before you put the tarp down, weighting the tarp down, and waiting 3 weeks at like the hottest butt crack part of summer, and just absolutely frying the crap out of it. And that will really set you up for success, starting from absolutely nothing. Now, if you have cool stuff on your property that's growing up in between some of this sod, then I encourage you save some of that, because this will absolutely zap a lot. The black tarp, or occultation, takes a little bit longer. It's a slower burn, but it is 6 weeks. It's just double that time. It just is a little bit more. It's just a little bit more uh, available to most people, given the fact that it is made out of more durable material more often, and also is something that you may already have on hand. And then finally, if you're having issues with, say, species that we'll be talking about down further in the presentation, about invasive species or problematic species, some of these species cannot be removed any other way but by chemical application. And so there is a small window within killing your lawn that chemical application may be helpful, but most of the time, persistence and elbow grease can get rid of lawn. Now, if you're converting at the scale of acreage, I have a disclaimer from the get-go. Just don't convert areas with pre-existing native species with little non-native vegetation. They already have a thing going on. If you already own habitat, just appreciate it. And if you think that there is something wrong with it, or there's an issue with it, I would talk to biological consultants and local land managers to see how you could possibly be managing this site, or if there's any particular concerns that you have, or if you want to take an inventory of what's there, or how you can incorporate more diversity. I encourage you to do that. But that is a different scale, rather than just like starting from a clear slate. Because frankly, when you're at the scale of pasture, you really will have a very hard time converting 20, 50 acres of open pasture without using chemical. Now, if you have a pasture that is relatively really intact, say hay fields are a perfect example of that. If you have a hay field or a lightly grazed field, you can go without the chemical. You can burn and you can hay it, and save those native elements. Or if you don't have either of those available to you, burning or haying, given their logistical difficulties, I encourage you to mow low, but just remove that thatch that you mowed down, just to expose that soil for you to seed. If you are using chemical, most people will use a fall glyphosate application. MPF uses 2 or 3. That's pretty heavy. But that fall glyphosate application in the early winter burn for bare ground is really like the standard method for converting pretty crappy pastures into native plantings. And then a fair warning: pigs, horses, heavy cattle grazing, any sort of industrial usage, really heavily damage the matrix, the soil. It does things to the soil that makes it really, really hard for native species to take off in them. You often will have these sorts of systems less readily accepting or receiving the native plantings, and you'll often have more problematic species taking over. And so it's just a much slower burn. So you should kind of lower your expectations if you have historical heavy usage on that land. And it'll just take more investment. And it will just take more time. So I encourage you to piecemeal this in however way it makes sense for you, but just a fair warning for that. So when I keep on talking about problematic species, and so I think it's really worthwhile jumping into what in the world I'm talking about. If you're not familiar with conservation and conservation work, this is a lot of it. Removing problematic plant species, why do it? I would like to introduce the concept of plant invasion biology. This is a phenomenon that is happening worldwide that has led to the introduction or the extinction of several species. Actually, there's a couple of species within the past year on some oceanic islands, Oceania islands, that went extinct due to introduced animals. And so this concept of invasion biology really can be filtered down from a historical phenomenon of European colonization. European colonists sent out horticulturalists and pet vendors all across the world, and they sought out all the species that they can find that they can make a buck out of, and they spread them out to every continent, everywhere. And most of the time, there were thousands of introductions to the place that I live of species that haven't had any ecological overlap with where I live for upwards to 100 million years. No checks and balances. But luckily, the thousands of introductions, most of these species can't live out of a cage or out of a garden box. But for the ones that can, which there are hundreds that can, they are what we call neophytes. They're new plants. They're plants that can survive. And most of these are completely benign. I mean, foxtail is a perfect example. Soteria species, they're at every construction site, at every railway cut, so on and so forth. They fall out of the matrix once native species show up. There are filtering down out of the hundreds that are able to survive from the thousands that have been introduced. Only like a dozen or so can outcompete local species. These are species that are opportunistic and generalistic back in their native regions where they have existed in these native within their ecosystems as native species, but now that they're introduced, they can outcompete native species. And pairing this with the information that we have from the ecological primer, our ecosystems are so heavily fragmented. I mean, we have 0.5% of the original prairie in Missouri left. We have 0.01% of the original prairie in Illinois left, so on and so forth. So of these systems that still remain, the little remnants of these systems that remain, they are heavily fragmented and broken. And so they're more vulnerable to these sorts of phenomenon, and are further unraveled by the introduction of these species. And this right here is a monocrop of bush honeysuckle in what was likely all clear cut at once. You can see these trees trying to establish themselves, but this process of succession has essentially halted because of the introduction of bush honeysuckle in this forest in Independence, Missouri. And so as gardeners and as plant managers, they're particularly difficult because of all the species that could be there, they're ones that do super well because they cannot be mechanically removed. You cannot pull them out. They cannot be grazed out, and they cannot be burned out. They often will actually all respond vigorously to any three of these managements because of some ecological relation that they have back at home. Like Johnson grass is from North Africa and is used to African fauna grazing it. A cow isn't going to do anything. Even a goat's not going to do anything to it. And so they are also really persistent in the soil seed bank, upwards to decades. Sericea can last in a soil seed bank for upwards to 20 years. And so really one of the options that you're left with is chemical removal. So it's really important to keep your eyes peeled so you don't have to go to these all the way to these kind of extreme ends. And depending on how bad the problem is, you may require a contractor to remove these. Because otherwise, if you try to sow and go about your business and try to sow native plants, they will ultimately kick everything out and just have an entire monocrop of this one plant. And so these are a non-exhaustive list, but of the top ones that I encounter and have to fight at my job are these species. Bush honeysuckle, cerisia, and Johnson grass being the most common ones. Reed canary grass is a wetland species that will take over wetlands. Calorie pear, we're getting into some of these ones that are a little bit more finicky. Calorie pears will take over and create thickets, but it's really in places that are super beat up. Same thing with teasel and winter creeper. I only see those around like highways and in like super urban areas. So places that have been completely terraformed and turned to something else. They're just really annoying and don't fall out of the matrix when I'm trying to convert them into native plantings. So now that you have removed what you've needed to remove, the thatch from the soil, you've gotten some bare ground, or you've prepared your garden bed, it's time to put, say, plugs in the garden. Planting in bunches in spring yields the best results. So let's abandon the English garden spacing and plant things in a little bit higher density. It is more abundant, it is more beautiful, and it is how these species have adapted, especially in these grasslands where they're literally like growing on top of each other. And a little design tip, if you were looking at a garden bed that either has a wall to the back of it or say two edges, but there's like a solid middle, make the back or the middle taller than the margins. That'll just give a little bit more dimension to the garden, and also really be intentional about the spacing of species based on height. So if you have a clump of, say, little blue stem, put in a little bit of penstemon next to it. Or if you have, say, a big blue stem, put something a little bit short next to it, like Antonaria neglecta, the field pussy toe. That you can really kind of experiment with kind of the dimensionality of it, and that can kind of give you not such a thatchy look if that's something that you are disgusted by in your Victorian sentiments. But if you can really kind of like manipulate the plantings in a way to make it a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, if that is what you desire. Now, I would also encourage you to explore like native ground covers. One that I really, really like is Pachyra obovata, or yellow ground sorrel. It's this beautiful, really dainty, cute spring bloom that just does absolutely awesome nearly everywhere it's at. It does appreciate a little bit of shade, but it's a pretty generalist species, and it does really, really well. It's just this kind of spinachy looking ground cover. It's very, very cute. And now, if you are not doing that, or if you're doing kind of some far spacing, or even if you're not, you can kind of experiment with it. Mulch in between the plugs. And you're like, oh my gosh, mulch is so expensive, yada, yada, yada. Check out Chip Drop. Chip Drop is a website that connects you with arborists that just have so much wood that they need to get rid of, and they want to drop it somewhere, like your house. You can check it out and get a chip hookup to drop. Seeding in the garden. I encourage you to sow about an eighth of an inch in the soil. I said an eighth soil, eighth inch in the soil in the fall. A lot of these seeds need the full winter to stratify, to scarify, and that cold weather breaks down dormancy mechanisms in that seed for them to then germinate in the spring. And you can do that directly on the ground, but you can raise them like you would a plug of a pepper, tomato, or cucumber. You just have to stratify them before in a polypod or a seed tray. If you hand broadcast, it's a very satisfying, like frolicking activity. That's really, really fun. But if you do that, I encourage you to check out Prairie Moon. They have look up Prairie Moon hand broadcast. It's this PDF that just online, and they have a step-by-step instruction, so you can at least get a little bit of consistent results, so it's not just like a straight line of where you've been. And they just tell you all the ins and outs. I encourage you to check it out if frolicking in the field is what you want to do, which I don't blame you. Push broadcast spreaders. It's those like often green things that you push, that like a cart that puts out fertilizer. Same thing. You just add chaff, which is like rice hulls or sand. Seeds that are really, really small don't spread super ergonomically. They don't spread super far. So got to add some stuff to it so that it has like a little bit of a bigger droplet, I guess. So it spreads out farther and heavier. And then if you really want to make do and you're afraid it's going to be too windy, you can lightly rake it in to get a little bit more soil contact, but don't do too much. You just want that sitting kind of right on the top. Now we're talking big game. Seeding on acreage. MPF's, the Missouri Prairie Foundation's ratio is 5 pounds of forbs to 2 pounds of grasses. I would look at the vendor guidelines of whatever seed mix you're buying, but you're like, grasslands, not a lot of grass. What's up with that? Grasses have no problems. They absolutely take off. Of the big four, Sargassum nutans, feathergrass, Andropogon gerardii, big blue stem, of Panicum virgatum, switchgrass, and of Schizachyrium, scoparium, little blue stem, they really take off, and they will dominate the vegetation, especially big blue stem and feathergrass. And so they kind of like lean back on it. I have seen mixes that are just forbs, just non-grass, non-woody vegetation species sown, and 5 years later the warm season grasses find their way there. They volunteered there. So it's something you can do. If you're fine with just all grass, that's perfectly fine too. But if you want kind of a more diverse prairie planting, then that's kind of the ratio that I would look at. I would sow them in December and February. And a snow sow is really pretty and works really well if it's not windy. Some of the best prairie plantings I've ever seen were sown on snow. And then again, broadcasting with chaff is another good practice with a broadcaster on as a tractor attachment, or even like a little drive-by thing you can attach at the back of a UTV. Seed drills I have heard really good things about. I have personally never used one. Here's a picture of one. I think you might be able to find them on auction for like at Purple Wave or something. But if you're looking for agricultural equipment, I really would check out seed drills or talk to people who have used them. Plugs on acreage. There are certain conservative species that will not germinate from seed. New Jersey tea, Ceanothus herbaceous or Ceanothus americanus, don't germinate super well, and other things like it don't germinate super well. And so you might just want to plant them directly into the soil as a transplant. I just would flag them and keep track of them, see if that investment was worthwhile. And if it works, then just keep going. But maybe start a little bit small just to track it. But if you are wanting a little bit more woody vegetation, or if something historically was like a woodland, then planting oaks and hickories and in kind of a prairie planting is a really neat thing to do. It really adds a little bit more structure and aspect to it that otherwise really wouldn't be there. Now we're on to establishment and establishment maintenance. Now maintenance in gardens, you really have it easy. Maintenance in gardens is just about watering in that first year if it's unseasonably dry or hot, but you don't have to. You might lose some plants in the process in an unseasonably dry or hot summer, but it's these are the conditions that they are adapted to. These are the conditions that they do really well in. Some of the especially like glade and scrublands, they look absolutely beautiful, like gardened by God after each drought. And so it's just another perk of native plant gardening is the fact that you really don't have to have any inputs. But if you want to baby your plants, that's fine. They just might get really tall. Do not fertilize for that exact reason. And also given the fact that a lot of these species are what we call oligotrophic, they are adapted to nutrient poor conditions. And just like any other garden, weed out what you don't want there, which in native planting is non-natives. And again, non-native cultivars can just like spring up and just put off beautiful blooms that like first year with a gazillion inputs. But those native species, they're a slow burn. You got to wait that second to third year to really get the full show, and then they really take off. It's really cool to see. But if you have a really like hot or dry year, that might stunt them a bit to that third year. So just have healthy expectations going into it, and don't fret over like Reddit or whatever. Now maintenance on acreage takes a little bit more. So I would encourage you to potentially mow once or twice if you're expecting major challenges. So this is the having the expectations. If you had like a pig, if you're on like a historical like pig farm or horse track or whatever, those sorts of conditions might make it really hard for establishment of these species. They may just not be received very well. And so, in order to encourage recruitment, getting more sun exposure on that soil might activate that germination and might allow for greater abundance, and make them not shrouded by others. Also, mowing it down once or twice may allow you to actually see Sericea and teasel much better, especially in these grassland systems. Sericea is the main challenge. So, treat those before they become an outsized problem from the get-go is like the most important part. If you really nip it at the bud at the beginning, it'll really save you a lot of headache later. And then once there's enough fuel that is built up, which may take 2 years, but there's every once in a while it really is able to get going within the first year. I would do a dormant season fire in these prairie plantings. It shouldn't be too flashy, shouldn't be too crazy. But once there's sufficient fuel, getting that in as soon as you can, getting it on a cycle would really save you a lot of headache for maintenance long term. Maintenance in gardens in the long term, you made it, you did it, you're here. Congratulations. You could really enjoy it. I encourage you to hop on iNaturalist and log all those bugs and birds that you haven't seen before, hopping around your native species that you've planted. And logging them, really kind of exploring the things that has been brought to by your garden. But you can also consider adding like different rock and water features. Kind of get fun with it. Put in some xeric or hydrophilic species. If you live in Kansas City, you go to Westport Road, and you go to that like insane malevolent intersection. Right next to the Andes and the Quick Trip and that shopping center, and you see that old Westport sign with like the Pioneer carriage. You look below it, and there's a bunch of prickly pear, bunch of opuntia growing on rock. I wish more people did that. It's freaking awesome, and they have crazy, insane, like almost like pie plate sized blooms. I mean, they're absolutely beautiful. Hydrophilic species. Half our vascular flora is our wetland species. So really experiment with the sedges and the native irises. It can get fun. And if you see these plants getting eaten in your garden, or they look spotted or spoiled with different rusts and eggs laid on them, don't fret. That is nature happening. Those are the ecological relations that we have lost from the loss of habitat. So watch it unfurl, watch it happen. The ancestors to these plants have encountered these species for thousands of years and have adapted resistances to these sorts of encroachments like herbivory and disease. So clean up the thatch in the spring, leave those leaves for all of the fun butterflies and beetles and other insects that pupate within the dead and dying foliage of the garden. For the maintenance and acreage, this is really the creme de la creme. This is really where you it can be life changing. Can see essentially kind of the engine turning over. You can kind of see the flashes in the pan of like something really starting to happen. You will often see within these native plantings, like one year it's all black-eyed Susan, and the next year it's all penstemon, and then the next year you really have a heavy grass year, and then the next year everything's much shorter, and so on and so forth. That is succession at work. That is the land literally weaving itself back together, becoming habitat. And often, if you look at prairie plantings that are like 15, 20 years old, they're all really short because they've gone from the hot and heavy throes of primary succession to a point where all that competition has kind of been sorted out. Like it's really starting to mature into something. And so there's not a lot of nutrients being thrown around. There isn't these huge, vast, booms and shrinks in populations. Like they're really starting to even themselves out. And that stability is really beautiful to see. And you can eventually recognize it for what it is. And it's magic. And so to protect it, just be diligent, monitor, and treating the problematic species that you find often at those edges of your planting. But as it gets older, the more resistant it is to this sort of encroachment. The fabric becomes tighter and has a finer thread count, if you may. And you can also maintain this by, if it's a prairie planting, doing a dormant season fire every 2 to 3 years. If it's a pretty open woodland, like it's a true woodland, not like a forest with a bunch of fun spring ephemerals in like March and April, but it's like a true woodland with like those native warm season grasses underneath those big oaks. You can burn every 4 to 6 years, and just watch it get shorter and more diverse. And that is my talk. Thank you for listening, and I am ready for answering questions in a question and answer.
Thank you so much, Gavin. That was great. I guess I do have one question just right off the cuff
Yeah.
is let's say someone is like really passionate about these matters, wants to do something, but they like don't have a lawn, they live in an apartment in a city. How could they get involved in any kind of like, I don't know, native plant arena, I guess? Like what would they do or what would you recommend?
Yeah. So this is obviously dependent on where you live, and your like native plant conservation scene. But at least where I live in Kansas City, organizations like Casey Wildlands, like Deep Roots, and uh, MDC, the Missouri Department of Conservation, all have volunteer opportunities for people to actually restore habitat, to actually get hands-on experience working on this sort of stuff. And that includes doing honeysuckle removal. That includes collecting seed, which is just I just think people are just built to. I think we're just like little pack rats. I think it just scratches such an itch in our brain, just being in a big outcrop of river oats and just like running your hands through these stands of oats and throwing it in a bag. And at the end, you have like a bag, and you can like shake the bag. You can put your hand in the bag, feel all the seed, and then that seed will then be sent to their sorter, and then that seed will be directly sown into restoration and into creating habitat. And so it's just a really 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 beautiful thing to see. Another thing that people can do is there is a $25 class that is a hybrid class that people can take with the Department of Conservation that gets them at least their feet wet in prescribed fire. So this will teach you everything about fire behavior and fire ecology. And then there's like about a 4 to 5 hour field day at your local MDC office that you can sign up for that occurs about in December. Um, and so that will really get you kind of experience on that. Um, and that will be a really good in way to getting established on some of the local fire teams. You can volunteer to fire once you can volunteer to be on prescribed fires once you have a certification. And so that's also a really cool experience in maintaining habitat. And then also, uh, there's a little bit of guerrilla gardening that people are capable of doing. If you have a little patch that's untended, just put some rocks around it to make it look a little better, and you can sow some seed that you've either collected or bought. So those are kind of the basic intros, and that's kind of my rambly answer to starting to get involved.
Nice. Well, thank you. That's perfect. Spencer, do you have a question?
And could you expand a bit on how doing all of this native planting and conservation work has like helped you grow as a person? If in fact it has helped you grow as a person.
How it's helped me grow as a person? Oh man, it is. I think the I think I need to like jump into the deep end for a second. So the concept of like an apophatic god, like a god that you like can't know, is something that is like closest to the view that I have grown for the world. Like there's just so much complexity to it, and I just can't possibly know it all. And I think when faced with that fact, I think people can go one of two ways. They can either like double down in like fear and like um disgust to it. Like they can just be so overwhelmed by the fact that there's just so much to do and so much to know, and they never will know or do it all. Or you can grow, um, you can grow a sense of humility and awe about it, and like excitement about it. And I think that was something like that I kind of like fidgeted on, where I would be both like so stressed and so sad that I could not know it all or do it all. But then increasingly it has grown into awe. And I think that has made me a more patient and resilient person than I was prior. I also think that seeing things work on a time scale like they do on the level of landscapes is really gives context to a lot. It really makes some of the worst bits of our own creations in human society just seem pale in comparison, and it does bring comfort. And I think it also gives it informs. I think it informs how to treat people better, and I think that I have with that grown more patience and generosity for others. I don't know. I think it's made me kinder than I was before. I think I was less kind than I am now after doing this stuff, because it's hard. It really does beat you down at times. So you gotta learn how to be resilient to it.
That's a great answer.
Thanks.
Any other questions, Spencer?
I mean, this is a frivolous question, but a lot of our supporters are cat people, and one of our cats is, intruding into this interview. So, do you feel that native plantings create a richer environment for cats to thrive?
That is a actually like unbelievably controversial question. And so let's get into it. So the question of like of pets has, as I've like gotten deeper into it all, I look at my cat like Bernie or Sesame with just such intrigue that I once had not had before, because they're just such a peculiar creature. Like they truly are domesticated, but they still have like that like predator prey response that you see in like wild species. But just like kind of like a chicken, like they're not like they don't belong outside either. Like they're just like this like in between thing of our and also their creation, like both us and them, like making them into what they are. And so this is this really peculiar evolutionary relationship that when you like have such a like context or background for like what wild things are, you look at a cat and you're like, what the hell is that? And so cats out in the wild are controversial because they actually do really hunt down native bird species, and like grassland bird species have seen like an 80% drop in populations, not due to cats, due to habitat loss. But with urban areas, it's kind of difficult with like cats going out and about with some of the birds there. But it is hard because like I like got a tent for my cat, so my cat can like also touch grass, because they're also an animal that also likes being outside and does well for the psychology. So I would like to think that they would have a better time in warm season grass than turf. So that's my answer to the controversial question.
Because I have another kind of random question. Do you have like a rant on lawns at all? Or like,
Yeah, I can rant about lawns. So the first so I had a my first job at the institution I now work at was actually on the park side. I've now since moved over to the natural resource department. But it was just such a like culture shock hearing some of like the park managers argue about like what equipment creates the best like striping in a lawn, and it to me just registers as nothing but like a cultural disease. I'm like, are we seriously are we seriously arguing about the best way to create lines in a lawn? And it just it just is a insight into the fact that when we're at this point when we are like creating geometric shapes into a monoculture of a piece of property that used to like have all of these different sorts of things on it. Um, it's at that point that we realize that like we've lost the plot so hard. Um, Pennsylvania Prairie in Missouri in a like pizza box sized box had 49 plant species. That is the world record of plant species within a pizza sized box. Um, and that is the sort of landscapes that we had here. And now if you look at a lawn, it is all just one thing. It's all one thing. And so it just baffles me too that we just spend so much time defending all of this turf grass with all of these resources, all this money, all the time mowing, all the inputs fertilizing, all of the I mean, if you have like a mold issue, I mean, there's even like fungicide applications. Like there's just so much money poured into it that frankly upon upfront investment is just so big in comparison to just native plantings. Like it's like sure the upfront cost of like getting seed and then like doing some like maintenance is there, but really when you put them side by side, it just isn't even close. And it's like, with the exception of like soccer fields, who in the world is like, ah, yeah, that's where I want to be. That sparks joy in me. I just don't hear that. I don't ever hear that. It's always like it's always like if you go to a photographer, where are they going to take you? They're going to take you not to like a lawn. If it's a lawn, there's going to be something else behind it, like an actual like flower bed or a stand of trees. Like it's the dimensionality and diversity that actually like creates beauty and joy and inspires people to do stuff. So anyway, that's my off the dome lawn rant. There you go.
Have people tried to hit you with the argument that it's like this subconscious feudal hangover that the dream we're like subconsciously pursuing is that we want to be a lord with so much livestock that our lawn can be pristinely grazed, and that's what's drives this lust for monoculture.
That the grazing element is something that I actually have not heard of. I really do resonate with that. I think the feudal hang up is definitely something that I think is like the core of it. I think especially if you're I wish somebody would like track the like date of turf grass planting by country and then like put that against like the expansion of like European colonialism because it wouldn't be a Venn diagram, it'd be a circle. Like it just would be an absolute parallel. And culturally, it definitely is like this like cultural export of misery from one small island to the rest of the world, known as England, and just is a exhibition of ownership and property, that is just so alien to anything else living. Um, and it's hard to not frame it, but into an economic framework, because it is that's all that it is. It's just an exhibition of like look at all of this that I own, and you can like see every undulating hill and topographical change in this perfect monoculture, and that just reads is so colonial, and it just isn't just a read, but I feel like it's actually historically true. But yeah, and the grazing element is really interesting though.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that either. That's interesting. Okay, I have one more question on topical lawns now that I'm thinking about it. This is probably maybe a stupid question. Let's say someone like took out their whole grass lawn. It ended up being this beautiful native lawn. Could they leave the leaves without feeling like they're gonna kill the plants, the native plants? Like, I'm just thinking about it in terms of tree season. Everyone's
Yeah.
in a hurry to clean up their leaves, bag them up, whatever. We've got tons of leaves from people bringing us their leaves that they don't want in their lawn. But would native plants in a yard or in a former lawn appreciate the leaf matter as it is? Or would you still have to like scoot them away a bit?
Yeah. So I mean, that's not a stupid question at all. I mean, if you have if you have a planting already present, then that leaf layer, like you put plants underneath a tree, and that is a shaded system, and you have put in like partial shade, full shade plants, like that one that I mentioned, the yellow ground sorrel, the Baccara ovata. I mean, you see it like these spinachy, almost kind of purpley leaves in the winter, like thriving underneath that leaf litter. And it's really, really cool to see just like all of the stuff hiding underneath all of the leaves in these forested systems. But within at least like say you're like planting something that next year, you would have to remove the leaves to get that soil contact. Just mechanically, that's a barrier. But the uh, but once you get that established, I mean, leaving the leaves is not going it's not going to do too much damage to that system, or to the plantings. Um, and something that's really cool that actually a professor at Rockhurst studied is the concept of the phylosphere. So it's just all of the microbial communities on leaves, um, and there's like hundreds of thousands of square miles of phylosphere in the world at like all times, and so there's like constant like inoculation of microbial communities from like the top of the tree to like the soil and like back up as well, and so like there's like this feedback microbially between ground and the tree. um, and I mean, I have not done the literature dive to see, but like I'm sure there's also an interaction between that and also the understory species as well. So yeah, it's really fun to see like spring ephemerals like starting to peek out between like those oak leaves. It's very very cute, like a blanket.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's great. We just need more cases for leaving the leaves in order to
Yeah.
people not feeling
So
like they
so
have to take
people are
their own.
dumping leaves on you.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
People are dumping leaves on you.
Yeah, but we could use them. The goats and sheep love them. They're like little potato chip snacks and they're dry. And then it
Awesome.
just is extra like mulch and fertility for our paddocks. So we're taking them. We're taking them from our suburban families who can't use them. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah. So if anyone needs to drop off leaves, they can call us. Yeah.
But yeah, it is one of those ironic things where it's like our families that view what we're doing as this kind of eccentric, uh, kind of quixotic, dubious enterprise that is irresponsible are the ones spending the most time gathering up leaves and then hauling them over to us. It's an ironic situation we're all in.
Yeah, it is. It really, really is. The I don't know. Sometimes it's you do, especially when you're like stuck in the middle of it, like when you're like in the process of making these sorts of things happen, it does kind of you kind of do feel like a rat in a pinwheel a little bit, like kind of pretty quixotic in making it happen, and there's a lot of irony. But it's really cool to kind of have those like breakthrough moments where you like start to see like things come together and start to work, um, despite the leaf gatherers of the world doing their best.
Yeah, can you expand on what you just said, like what it looks like being a conservationist and the gap?
Yeah, it's so ugly. It's so ugly. There is like the workplace. So okay, I'm gonna go through the ugly first, and then we'll get to the other side. So the ugly is the workplace hazards are wild. I'm really lucky to live in a place that I don't need like snake chaps. But if you're like a botanist or like a land manager in Florida, you're so screwed. You're gonna get like struck by so many different venomous snakes. It's insane. But here too, the main hazard is like tick-borne illness. I mean, just so many people I know are just got by alpha gal, um, and then you have like the Heartland virus and endometriosis and all sorts of like diseases that you really have to be on top of. And then obviously you're just like out in the wild so often, and I mean just like not falling somewhere or not getting stuck in a hole somewhere, and then like all of the different like weather conditions too, it being hot and it being cold, it being heat related illness, whether it being my my toes aren't feeling normal again after I get back inside, sort of weather. It just that sort of stuff, and then also like fire too is just an innately dangerous thing, and to have a healthy fear of is really really important. And the accidents happen, and using heavy equipment is also dangerous, and accidents happen there too. And so there's just a lot of danger, and I think it takes someone with a certain degree of situational awareness and also uh, knack for adrenaline to get into it. And I'm super early on, and seeing some of the people down the line that have like become insane from all of the from all of the hazards and the pressure of it is kind of fun. But the on the other side of all of that, on this of the workplace hazards and conditions, um, when things are working and things are going well, you just have those moments where, like, say you're like on a UTV drive to a work site, and it's like 6:30 in the morning in July, and it's foggy and it's hazy with the humidity, and the sun's like blasting up over the horizon, and you're just like in some of the wildest places of your region. Driving to work is just magical. I mean, it really is something like you just have to like kind of step back and say wow. And then those brief moments where you do really get to either a result or a really cool part of a project, um it is you just kind of feel like you just kind of feel it like staring back at you to a degree, like looking at like we did a report on one of the oldest prairie plantings in JCPRD's system, in Johnson County system, and like looking at the data but also being in the quadrat collecting the data, you can see the stability, you can see it like solving itself out, and it is just so rewarding. At the same time, communicating that to people and like that experience to people is kind of a difficult thing to do. And it's something that, especially people who are attracted to science and people who are attracted to conservation, often don't have the personalities or abilities to do. Speaking and relating to other human beings is often hard for these types of personalities. They're often really eccentric and reclusive, and I don't blame them. And so it's hard to get it out, and especially in this political climate too. It's hard sometimes just not to feel alone in it. Right now, especially. But I, especially now, and the kind of deeper into it, I'm really, even if things do get worse before they do get better, which I do believe is likely, the pendulum swings, and they're all these projects are there's so many projects that are still happening and still ongoing, and it's I don't know. I just feel like for the people who have still kind of white knuckled onto their positions in conservation through the budget cuts and the project foreclosures and such, I really feel like we're battening down the hatches, and what matters is becoming more and more evident, because of that, through this kind of really galvanizing experience right now. Um, and it's a community of people that are often really cool, and are just like endlessly devoted to it. So yeah, that's how it's going, and that's how it's been.
Gotcha. Well, I think we can probably wrap it up here unless you have anything else. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you for letting me ramble on.
You got
And
conclusions you want to get out there that we didn't ask about?
oh gosh, I think you all really covered it. And I think I got out a lot of it. But just if you're wanting to plant, it's really coming down to it. Get that ground ready, get ready to sow some seed. And if you don't do that now, that's fine. There'll be plugs to buy in the spring, and if you don't have space to sow or plant, that's also fine. Right now it's like peak seed sorting season with KC Wildlands. Check them out. It's also coming in. We're getting into peak fire season too. So get some certifications, get some experience, volunteer on crews, and hop onto iNaturalist and create an account if you haven't so already. So those are kind of the plugs that I have to plug, and that's it. So that's what I got.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gavin. We really appreciate the time you took putting this all together and your time sharing your massive knowledge with us about native plants and ecoregions and everything between. So, thank you very much.
Of course, I appreciate it. Thank you.